We're in this situation now where, frequently any manifestation of masculine ambition in even its juvenile forms, the desire to engage in rambunctious play, let's say, is instantly associated not only with pathology that needs to be medicated, let's say in the case of ADHD. We associate that male ambition with, the force that's literally the patriarchal oppressive force that's literally destroying the world. Well, how the hell do you expect young men to react to that? And the answer might be something like, there's too bloody many people on the planet anyway. And if we stopped running around doing things would be a lot better. It's like, that really leaves them nowhere to go, doesn't it? Except to some very dark places in some situations. What we're doing is awful. It's absolutely awful. When I was talking to Franz de Waal, I read part of his book on difference, and there was this section that he cited from a female author who, she said she threw up her hands in dismay because she couldn't stop her young boy from playing with guns. She took everything that was even remotely resembling a gun out of the house, and then she caught him one day, shooting the toothbrush at the cat. Bang, bang, bang. And instead of noticing that he had this male propensity to aim and shoot that was deeply rooted in her son, she was appalled to the core by his intractable masculinity and believed that her, ideologically addled sense of what constituted masculine behavior was so morally admirable that it was perfectly fine to her to be disgusted by the fact that no matter how hard she oppressed her son, he was still a boy. And all of that was couched in this moral terms. And I thought, you witch, that's absolutely unforgivable. Yeah. To see that as such an intrinsic part of your boy's character, and then to throw your hands up in moral dismay about exactly this, patriarchal oppression and the toxic masculinity and all of that. Here's what college kids are asked to swallow now, as far as I can tell. Every single manifestation of sexual interest or sexual orientation of any conceivable type is to not only be tolerated, but to be celebrated, and celebrated in some sense under compulsion and by force of law. No discrimination whatsoever on the basis of sexual behavior or sexual preference. So no sexual interest is so abnormal, let's say, in the technical sense that you can put up any barriers against its expression whatsoever, conceptually or otherwise. And simultaneously, every single act of sexual interest between a young man and a woman is so dangerous and so pathological that you need something approximating contractual consent to engage in the simplest acts of initial physical intimacy. Yeah. So how the hell can both of those things be true at the same time?
The feedback I'm getting from young people this age is, on the one hand, I'm being told, don't take an initiative unless you have, ask for permission and get a yes. And then other times, girls are laughing at me for doing that. We're saying to boys that if you move too quickly, you're a harasser. If you don't move quickly enough, you're a wimp, or you'll never be seen. But we're not saying to girls what to do, how to assert themselves. We're not saying to girls, it is not just an option to share the risks of rejection. It is an expectation on you to share the risks of rejection, not just the risks of rejection with the 20% of boys that are the superstars and really outstanding, but with any boy you have an interest in, that you expect yourself to reach out. Will you be rejected more? Absolutely. Anyone who takes risks in life will be rejected, but our job is to prepare you as girls to take risks, because there's no entrepreneur who's successful without taking risks. And so your job is to take risks. Now, what about if a boy reaches out to you and it's moving too quickly? So your job is to say, no, not now. But if I change my mind, I'll let you know, because I now see that you're interested. And so I don't have to worry about rejection. But don't keep trying to be sexual with me. I'll take the responsibility for reaching out, because feminists say, what is there about no that you don't understand? Well, here's what there is about no that is often not understood. Is it no forever? Not interested in me at all? Is it no till maybe I say yes to another date? Is it no until I have maybe some wine to relax me? Is it no until I have some coffee to wake me up? Is it no till we play some music and I feel very intimate with you after the music is being played? Should I turn the music up? Should I turn the music down? Or were you talking too much about yourself and not about me? Or were you talking too much about me and not about yourself? All of these things are part of what happens in the initial.
Right. Well, part of that is, that's exactly it. I mean, when you object to someone, you see this in fights between couples. It's like, well, is this like a divorce fight, or is this like we talk for 10 minutes and make peace fight? Or is it one of the intermediary stages along that pathway? How serious is this? And no has exactly that ambiguity. Yeah, well, no and yes, those are very difficult things to negotiate. I don't think there's anything more difficult to negotiate between a man and a woman than no and yes, or between any two people that are in an intimate relationship or beginning one. It's like, what don't you understand? Well, there's an infinite number of things I don't understand. And what makes you so sure you're so damn clear about your communication?
We have this perfect opportunity for teaching our daughters that you can say no and say, I'll take responsibility for anything I am interested from this point on, as opposed to you keeping on trying. We're doing tongue kissing, and the average girl knows that, if there's no somewhere, they'll be, having intercourse in about 5, 6, 10 minutes. And for many girls or women, that's too quick. But then the pulling out of the tongue, does that mean, respect her, that the tongue is being pulled out? And then when do you put the tongue back in? When do you restart the process again?
Well, it's also quite difficult if she's confused about it, which she's likely to be, because it's not like that's not a maelstrom of conflicting motivations and emotions. Should I continue? How much do I like this boy? Am I going to be a slut? Is this something I'm going to enjoy? What are my girlfriends going to think? Is this the guy for me? Is this something casual? Is casual sex okay? Am I going to get pregnant? Can I take revenge on my absent father by falling in love with this loser, etc., etc.? And if that wasn't complex, we wouldn't have any movies or novels. It's unbelievably complex. I read this book called Billion Wicked Thoughts that the Google engineers had put together by analyzing patterns of pornography use among men and women. And it's really quite a brilliant book. Because they're engineers, it's really apolitical. They just looked at the data. They are not political. They just said what it said. And they found that men and women both used pornography. With men, it was all pictures. And with women, it was all written. It was all literary. And they identified the 5 categories of porn star in these literary romance pornography representations: pirate, vampire, surgeon, billionaire. I can never remember the 5th, but they're all the same pattern. They identified it perfectly. It's Beauty and the Beast. High status, dangerous male, tamed by attractive female and enticed into a reciprocal relationship.
Yes.
But with difficulty, right? Yeah. And so the sexual component of it is mutual exploration, yes and no, tension, conflict, and the resolution of that. But what's so interesting about it, and it's the same pattern in 50 Shades of Grey, it's exactly the same thing. The guy isn't a pushover. He's actually someone very forward in every way, but capable of responding to the imposition of boundaries, and then also capable of establishing a relationship. But the fact of his willfulness, in some sense, is core to the sexual attractiveness. Well, that's no different than the manifestation of male ambition on the status hierarchy. It's exactly the same thing. And why we have to lie about this is it's sickening to me, and it's unbelievably destructive, both for men and women. I mean, it's not like the girls are benefiting from any of this. They're having catastrophic relationships in college, and you get these colleges now where it's like 60% or 65% girls. And you think, well, that's a hell of a good thing for the guys because they have this plethora of women. And it's not, because first of all, it's still 10% of the guys. And maybe they have carte blanche on the sexual front, but all that does is teach them to be narcissistic psychopaths because they can have a different one-night stand every day of the week. And that's a hell of a training ground for establishing a permanent relationship. And then the other guys, well, they're in the same position that guys generally are, which is they're chasing after scarce resources. And the girls, they're completely frustrated because the high status guys have zero interest in pursuing a long-term relationship. And so that's a lovely situation. I heard some recent, not so much data, but some stories from people in universities where the girl to boy ratio is climbing above 70. And they say the girls stop applying at about that point.
The dropout rate among the boys in college is much greater. And so in the next few years, it's predicted that the ratio of female to male graduates will be 2 to 1. 2 female to 1 male. And that creates this thing that I was saying before about, the women who graduate from college, generally speaking, want a man who's at least a college graduate. And so if she's only half as likely to have a college graduate around her, and a lot of males are dropouts, the average woman, especially when a woman starts looking for the possibility of having a child and wanting a good father to be involved, she doesn't usually look in among dropouts. And 66% of the people between 25 and 31 who live back at home are male. She's not likely to go to bed with a guy who lives in his parents' basement, and she's not likely to search unemployment lines. And high school dropouts, 20% of high school dropouts are unemployed for most of their 20s. And so this leaves a terrible market for girls. And this is one of the reasons I say we're all in the same family boat. And
Right, definitely.
When only one sex wins, both sexes lose. And unfortunately...
Yes, it's really sad that we even have to say that, because it's so bloody obvious. It's like, whatever you do to boys, you do to girls. And if you're not wise enough to see that, well, then you should clue in. And if you do see it, you proceed nonetheless. It's like, yeah, well, we know what you're up to. Nothing but trouble.
And that is the huge challenge with where feminism has been going recently. At least when I was on the board of NOW in New York City, at least a portion of feminism was saying, I am woman, I am strong, as Helen Reddy. And now it's mostly, I am woman, I've been wronged. And we have this hashtag Me Too. And I know a lot of women who have been able to speak up as a result of the hashtag Me Too. But having hashtag Me Too as a monologue rather than having hashtag Me Too as a dialogue is really a crime, because it makes women feel that they must be right. There's no response. There's no male experience of him being rejected by a woman, or him being in a divorce situation and the woman bad-mouthing him to the child. There's no understanding that men who are going through divorce are 8 times as likely as their female counterparts to commit suicide. There's just no understanding of that male experience. Well,
there's also no, I've talked about this several times and become very unpopular as a consequence, but when I studied antisocial behavior, and particularly at McGill, I studied female and male antisocial behavior, and male antisocial behavior tends to be much more physically violent. And so most of the people who are imprisoned are male, mostly because we imprison violent offenders, which is kind of interesting. We don't necessarily imprison white-collar criminals, even if they defraud like 60,000 people. But, a mugger, well, we're going to lock him up. And yeah, I can understand that, although not entirely, because defrauding 60,000 people out of their pension isn't exactly nothing either. But in any case, it's almost all men in prison, and it's almost all violent offenders. And so then you say, well, what's the female equivalent of antisocial personality? And that's a tough question, because it's much more subtle. But a lot of it is reputation destruction and exclusion, mean girl syndrome, and everyone understands that. You can't play with us, for example. That's a nice expression of female antisocial behavior. And that reputation destruction also scales really nicely on social media. And so one of the things I think is happening to our whole culture is that we're suffering from a radical influx of female-type antisocial behavior. That's cancel culture. That's reputation destruction and savaging. And so, but we can't have a conversation about that because all the pathology is on the male side. It's like, no, all the pathology isn't on the male side. Plain and simple. There's social pathologies that have a feminine orientation. That would be the infantilization of everything. And then there's toxic femininity, which is this tendency to derogate into savage reputations and to escape scot-free in the aftermath of that. And the use of manipulation and innuendo and all of that. Very, very difficult to cope with. Very difficult to put boundaries around too. So, especially on social media.